Hey everybody, welcome back to 2 Hours on a Sunday. I'm Nick.
And I'm Brian, and today we have a special guest. He's going to be featured a lot on our podcast in the coming future. He's got a lot of good insight, a lot of great ideas. And Mr. Jesse Market, how's it going?
How's it going, boys? I love being here. Love seeing you guys.
Good to see you. Today he's on because our topic today is a film we all loved growing up and we believe is an underrated Disney classic, The Emperor's New Groove.
Now, did this movie come out during the Disney Renaissance, or was it like just very shortly after?
Renaissance as in the 90s?
Yeah.
This is like 2003.
Oh, it was that long ago? Oh, okay. Well, it should be in the Disney Renaissance because it is spectacular.
Now, Jesse, we both watched this week, but I know your memory is so good that you have your entire review of this movie based on the 90s, the early 2000s of your childhood.
Yeah, this was a movie I grew up on. I don't know if by choice or if just by my family's poor ability to only buy certain movies at a time. But I watched this movie, 500 times in a row. I memorized this script as a child. David Spade, I thought he was the coolest. John Goodman, all of them. So this movie, I was just like, I don't know why, but I love this movie.
Because I remember, I was at your house all the time growing up, every weekend, and we were at least once a weekend we would be watching this movie.
100%. Yeah. No, I'll turn him into a flea is my monologue.
Yeah. And as we talk about this movie, we're going to talk about everything we love about it, starting from the top all the way to the end. I think we should kick it off. Everyone who hasn't seen Emperor's New Groove, you should watch it on Disney+. And the lead actors, David Spade plays the Emperor Kuzco. We have John Goodman playing the peasant Pacha. We have Eartha Kitt playing the evil Empress Yzma. And we have Patrick Warburton playing the most famous character, I think, of all time, Kronk. To start this movie off, this movie is basically about an emperor who's self-absorbed and only cares about himself. He runs his emperor. He doesn't care about anything other than his palace. And the goal of this movie is for him to build his water park in the most convenient spot for him. And that happens to be on a top of a mountain where Pacha and his family live. And his whole goal is to eliminate Pacha's home and to place his palace there. And Pacha doesn't believe in that. And he has to go tell his family that the bad news that they might lose their home due to, the emperor and his ways. And along the way, we have the Empress Yzma. And from Kuzco's perspective, she is living proof that dinosaurs exist. This is how he sees her. And there's a line they give in this movie where she is scary beyond all reason is one of the lines. And they say it 3 times in this movie. And I think it just goes back to how well the script was written because it helps you remember, for kids who are watching this, immediately connect with who they're talking about, right? So Kuzco's she thinks she runs things, but she really doesn't.
I love Kuzco because he's so oblivious to everybody else and their rules. He just expects things to be done and he thinks he's always right.
And he has a groove. Everybody.
He does. He can't mess with his groove. And there's this big number at the beginning just to get, everything. This movie is it's an hour and 20 minutes. This movie flies. And from the beginning, you get the theme song of Kuzco. And you basically see his whole personality in a matter of 3 minutes. Because after, he throws the old man out the window for throwing off his groove. Then he's going to pick his bride. And he's going down the line of these seven girls who pretty much all look the same, just with a different hairstyle. And he's like, don't like you, hate your hair. It's he's so condescending, but they're setting him up for a turn for later in the movie where he finally realizes he's not the only person in the world. So Jesse, what do you think of Kuzco?
He's kind of the human epitome of a fart. It's just, it's celebrity. You know what I mean? It's just celebrity. They're not good people, he's walking around, like you were saying, he's picking out the girls that he likes. He's like, I don't like your hair. And then he stops at one and is like, really? You think you should be here? It's crazy. And he kicks off Pacha off of his freaking house, off the hill. What are we doing? He's not a nice guy.
Yeah.
But it's like you said, it's good storytelling. He goes through the turn and you see him change and realize my life is not the only kind of life people can have. Lots of other people that struggle. You could be a llama and life's horrible.
Yeah.
But for me, that was the first thing I heard David Spade in ever. I know that, he did stand up. He did a lot of stuff before that. But for me as a kid, his voice was just like, oh, that's Kuzco.
Yeah, because even at the beginning of the movie, we could tell he doesn't care about any of his workers or any of his guards, even Yzma, because at the beginning when he finds her in his chair doing Emperor duties, he fires her, right? And he introduces us to Kronk, and who I think is one of the best characters I think Disney's ever created. And he even describes him as like, oh, this is Yzma's new right-hand man. It's the new model that's in. This is Kronk, the new model that, it's like all her men look exactly the same kind of thing. And he's just a generic. He doesn't have anything going on in his head. But like throughout the movie, we discover that he's actually really good at things. He's just airy. So, he fires Yzma and she just doesn't know what to do. And then it gets to the point where one of me and Jesse's favorite parts of the movie, where she's down in the lair and Kronk has a bunch of these molds of Kuzco's head, and she's just smashing them. And then it goes into one of the best monologues from Yzma, because I feel like the villains in this movie, for the first sell the movie, right? You love the villains.
Yes.
And she gives the speech, I'll turn him into a flea. And it gets into the part of how, Jesse, you said every line of dialogue in this movie. And I was reading the script, and every time there's a monologue, I've noticed they repeat a lot of the same words. So for kids to digest, it's easy for us to pick up on reoccurring sentences. So she says, I'll turn him into a flea, a harmless little flea. And then I'll put that flea in a box, put that box inside another box, and I'll mail that box to myself. And when it arrives, evil laugh. And then she'll smash it with a hammer. It's one of the, and then there's so much happening on screen, but you're getting fed the same line over and over again. And it's just feeding your memory like, oh my God, that's exactly, I'll remember that.
I love the line after that too, where they're like, or perhaps I'll save on postage and just poison him.
Yeah. Or to save on postage, I'll poison him with this. Yeah. And we talked about this in our Lightyear podcast, Nick, where we talked about comedy. And I feel like this was Disney's prime time they really showed off their animation skills, and their comedy writing and script writing, but because they had these actors, was on point. The comedy never slowed the movie down. Every point of joke was to either recall a joke and push the story forward, or to tie everything together and get a new perspective, because the movie's only an hour and 20 minutes.
Exactly.
Everything flies and the jokes push it even faster than it should. Right?
Yeah. There's no pauses for the joke to land. You don't need that. It goes right through it. If you catch it, you catch it. If you don't, you'll catch it on the next go.
And Kronk, he's such a buffoon in the best way possible. And Yzma's so evil in the most Disney way. But Kronk, he's so with her.
Yes.
But yeah, he's so good at the same time. He's like, oh yeah, we'll definitely do this, because it goes into the next scene at the dinner table. And she's like, it's dinner time, right? And she has this whole pose and lightning strikes, and it cuts to the next scene. Yzma's like, everything ready for tonight? And he's like, oh yeah, I thought we'd start off with a soup and a small salad, and we'll see how we go from there. And then she's like, no, I'm not talking about dinner. And he's like, oh, right. He's clicking back into, he's supposed to be an evil disciple, right? What does Kronk mean to you, Jesse, as a character? Do you think he's one of your top 5 all time?
I think it has to be. Maybe not if you're thinking about characters, villains, heroes, anything, but if you're just talking about comedic characters or
Disney's ensemble.
Yeah, influential characters, they made a spin-off with him called Kronk's New Groove. That's how much people loved Kronk.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting, with the character design of him, the actual drawing of him, because it's based pretty much on how Patrick Warburton looks. And it's the exact same thing with Yzma. You were talking about how Yzma is the epitome of evil earlier, where you're like, oh, she's, she looks worse than she ever has, or whatever the line was. It's
it's scary beyond all reason.
Scary beyond all reason. That's a tough line, because that Yzma is literally based on Eartha Kitt, how she looks, that's what she looks like. So it's damn, Disney, why'd you gotta do Eartha that? Come on, what the hell?
Yeah, because we were watching Kuzco, and Adria was like, oh my God, I could totally see David Spade in his design. And I loved early Disney stuff, because they really put the actors into the characters. They still kind of do today, but even Pacha, John Goodman to a T,
Mm-hmm.
when Yzma asks him about the poison, it's just another line of dialogue to really dive into the characters, but to make us remember these lines, because he goes, "Oh right, the poison, the poison for Cusco. Cusco's poison. The poison is especially picked out for Cusco, to kill Cusco." It's like he says poison a bunch of times, and he says, "Yes, that poison." And she's like, "Yes, that poison." He's like, "I got you covered." and she's like, "I'll propose a toast." And he'll be dead before dessert. And then Kronk forgets again that this is all an evil plan to get rid of Cusco. And he's like, "Oh, that's a shame though, because dessert's going to be delicious." And it's just like every time he talks, you want to pay attention. And Disney did such a great job with bringing that character to life.
I loved the death scene when he just like falls face first into his bowl. It's just such a snappy death. And then he pops right back up.
Because even before that, they make a joke about Kronk's spinach puffs, and he's like, "Is something burning?" And he's like, "My spinach puffs!" And he runs off screen, and then Yzma and him are talking, and it's dead silence, and then he comes back in. He's like, "Saved him!" Like that was the mission, right? His mission was to save his cooking. Meanwhile, he keeps forgetting that the whole purpose of this dinner was to kill Cusco.
And their dialogue between Cusco and Yzma is just spectacular. It's that awkward, "I've just fired you, I have nothing to talk about."
Yeah.
And
he's flicking the fork, right? He's just
he's like, because I remember he says something in reference to Kronk. He's like, "He seems nice," and she's like, "Yeah, he's great." It's like,
yeah, he's great. Because then when he comes back, Yzma has to remind him again that Emperor needs his drink, and he's like, "Oh, right." And it's like it's so obvious, but Cusco's so oblivious because he doesn't care about anybody. And he goes over and he doesn't remember what cup has the poison in it. So he puts it in the flask and he's shaking it up and he's like, "The drinks are literally on the warm side," and everything's blowing up. And he comes back and he's like, "Don't drink the poison." And he's trying to tell Yzma. And like when they pour it out, they do the classic thing with animation where it's like it's going behind him, and that's when what you said, he just passes out, and then he pops right back up, and they're all confused. And then they don't know what to do, and Yzma's like, "Hit him on the hit
with the broccoli."
And then with the broccoli, and he still doesn't understand what she's saying, and he's like, "Oh right," and he finally knocks him out, and she's like, "What is going on?" And he's like, "He's supposed to be dead," and Kronk's like, "Yeah." And then she finally figures out that the vial he gave her was extract llama, and he's like, "All your potions kind of look the same, so I think you should rework your labeling." She flicks up the drawing of what's on it, and then that's when we get, she sends him off to go take care of business, right? Go finish off Cusco because I did my part. Now you have to finish yours. And it gets into one of the best sequences, I think, in the movie, where he's doing his own theme music. And I read a tidbit on IMDb where Patrick Warburton, like, he made that up on the spot, and he thought Kronk needed his own theme song. So that was all ad-lib.
I saw something too that they had to buy that melody from him, or they had to they had to get the rights to it or something in the movie because it wasn't like scripted or of their creation.
Yeah, that's funny, and it added so much to his character too, right? Because again, he doesnn't see himself as evil, and he's like, and when he sees people, are like, the people walk by, and they're like, he just the bag is still swaying. I love the overaction of the animation there, and you just think people don't see him, and he's so big, and then he finally gets to the waterfall, and he throws it over, and he's like, "Well, I'm done." And then it comes to a great joke that gets called back near the end of the movie, where the devil and the angel appear on his shoulder. And it's such a great thing for Kronk's character because it's like you have Yzma, it's like the evil devil is Yzma talking in his ear, but then you have Kronk, who's just an angel at heart, right? And he's like, "What do you got? Who are you guys? What are you guys doing here?" And they appear, and the devil's like, "I'll give you 3 reasons why you should just walk away." And then he goes, "Number 1, look at this guy." He's pointing to the angel. And he's like, he's got that sissy music thing, stringy thing, right? And he's like, "We've been over this. It's a harp." And he's like, "And that's a dress." And he's like, "Robe." And then he goes, "Number 2, look what I can do." And he does a handstand. Yes. And then Kronk's like, what does this have to do with anything? And then the angel's like, no, that makes sense.
He's got a point.
He's got a point there. And then he goes, no, I don't need you guys. Just go away. And they poof away. And then it's just like, it comes back at the end of the movie, but then he realizes he can't do the duty, right? So he runs, he books it, and he saves Kuzco from falling over the waterfall.
This is probably one of the first times where you're watching it and you're kind of scared. You know what I mean? Because you like Kronk, but you don't really know why. He's just funny. And then that Kronk is doing something bad because, it's also highlighted in the monologue or the dialogue he has with himself or multiple selves, so that something bad's happening. And then he falls, then he falls in the cart. And you're like, you don't know who Pacha is yet, or you kind of do, but you don't know you don't know what his deal is. So you're like, Kuzco's in this cart and he's like, what's going to happen? The story is coming together, the different pieces, Pacha being at the palace before on his way back. Like it's just written really well. And I think, it holds up because you don't know where the story is going to go.
Jesse, to kind of go off of what you said about, we don't really know what Pacha's deal is. At the beginning, when Kuzco's doing the overdub of how he got into the situation. Thank you. The narrating, how he got into that situation. He brings up Pacha and he's like, this guy's not all he's cracked up to be. So you kind of do think probably when we were younger as a kid, we're like, oh, maybe something bad is going to happen to him when he goes home with Pacha or whatever.
Right.
But now you're like, oh no, he is just a sweet guy. And Kuzco just turns everybody into a bad
against him. Because he's so self-absorbed.
Exactly. He has no idea about anybody else's character. He's just so self-absorbed.
I think this is when the movie really picks up. Pacha goes back to his home and Kuzco breaks out of the bag, and then he calls him a demon llama, and everything's happening. Kuzco doesn't know he's a llama yet. And then he's like, he tells Kuzco, he's like, look at yourself, wave your fingers in front of your face and do this. And he does this and he's like, oh my God, what is happening to me? He's trying to walk like a normal human being and he's just frolicking around. And he's like, you know what? And then this is when Kuzco orders Pacha to take him back to the palace so Yzma can change him back.
Mm-hmm.
And then Pacha's like, his whole thing is like, nope, I'm not changing you back until you decide you're not going to tear my house down and, build your little water fountain. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do it. And he's like, fine, then I'm not taking you back. And then the whole thing is Kuzco he's the emperor. So he thinks he can do absolutely anything and nothing can stop him. So he's like, fine, I'm going to go through the woods by myself. And then Pacha's like, it's dangerous. He's like, no, I'm good. And then he goes in and then the whole joke, he's like, oh, there's a leaf. And he's like, I'm so scared. And then he runs into the cobweb and he's all freaking out. And this is the first instance where we meet the squirrel.
Oh, the squirrel. Oh, I think he's my favorite character.
And the squirrel, and he brings out a balloon because that's out of the normal, right? And he's sitting around a pile of panthers, right, as well, because he tells them to go away. And then the squirrel's does this little squirrel voice. And then so he ties the balloon up like a llama, if you caught that reference. Yep. And then he hits the llama balloon with the pin, and it blows up. And Kuzco yells, and he covers his mouth because the sound of the balloon didn't wake up their panther or the jaguars.
Yep.
They didn't wake up the jaguars, but his yell did. And then he's running for his life. And then that's when we get the reintroduction. We find out Pacha's a good guy, right? He's a family man, but he doesn't want to see the emperor actually get hurt.
Right.
So he comes to his rescue, swinging on a vine. He misses him completely. And then he comes back, grabs him, swoops him up, and they end up underneath a tree, wrapped up in the vine that he's swinging on. And then Kuzco's like, I appreciate you saving me, but now look where we're at. Just one more. Everything's happening so fast. And now they're in another predicament together that they have to solve. The log cracks, and they end up at the bottom of this cavern, and they have to really work together because there's gators at the bottom trying to get them. They have to work together to try to, get out of this. And Kuzco doesn't trust him yet. Mm-hmm. So all his ideas are going back to back. He's just like, no, I don't believe you. And then Pacha pushes him against the wall and he's like, hey, he's like, we're supposed to be doing. And then he pushes him back. And then they're finally, okay, let's walk up together. And they're about to get to this little tree on the side of the mountain with this rope. And they can't reach it. And then Pacha's like, reach your head out and push me up. And then as he's doing it, Kuzco goes, it's a good thing you're not a big fat guy or this would be very difficult. But Pacha, he's a larger man. So I think it's a joke to make light of Pacha's size, but it's like, I don't know. And then the whole obscure stuff happens. Kuzco gets stuck inside the mountain.
Yep.
The bats swoop them up. They end up on top. And then we get another classic Cusco line, and I think, you know, Jesse and I said all the time when he saves Pacha from the falling mountain, and he goes, you know, look at me and my bad self. You know, I snatched you right out of the air. You know, and he goes, I'm a lonely Kaolin wall, and I'm taking you with me. The whole speech, and he's just doing this whole thing, and then Pacha's, again, it's his groove, right?
Yeah.
He thinks he's all king, right? And Pacha's like, you saved me. He's like, no, I'm just, you know, he's just doing, he doesn't believe he can save anybody, right? He's just so self into himself.
Yep.
But yeah, that line of, I'm a lonely canyon wall and I'm taking you with me. Well, not today.
Yeah, that line is epic. And I actually forgot about it, but I do remember that was, you know, one of the other ones that I said constantly. I snatched you right out of the air. That's just like, that's one of those ones. But
yeah,
when they're coming off the waterfall too, and they're talking to each other and they're commenting, I forget exactly how they phrase it, but it ends with kind of like, you know, is there a waterfall over there? Yep. Sharp rocks at the bottom? Most likely.
Most likely.
Most likely. Bring it on.
The writing. Great.
Yeah, all downhill. Yeah.
It's funny just because it's funny. It's not funny, you know, for any other reason. It's just, here's two people in a situation. It's not over the top. It's not out of context. It's all just like, these are the characters. This is how they would speak. And it's just so written truly to both the voice actors who are doing it and the characters themselves, how they've been developed as the story has gone on. So that's why, you know,
so agreed.
It just fits.
And I think it also has to do with how dangerous all these situations are. And the writing is so well done where it doesn't make kids think that, oh my God, like death is an option at any point.
Right.
But it's how these characters handle circumstance, like Jesse just said.
The idea of death not being a possibility, it starts right at the beginning with the poisoning scene. It's like, well, he's not dead. Nobody's going to really get hurt here. Let's just see the shenanigans ensue.
And again, it's, you know, Cusco, he doesn't see anything past his own, you know, glasses. And Pacha's trying to make the fire, and he spits and puts out the fire, and he's shaken off, and he's drying himself off, and it puts out the fire again. And Pacha's just trying to make camp, and Cusco just doesn't know what's going on. And then he ends up just lying next to the rock, right, the mountain surface, and he's shivering.
Yeah.
And then Pacha, he sees him shivering, so he puts his
poncho.
Pacha's poncho over top of Cusco, and Cusco, you know, he finally comes around and, you know, there's more to life than just yourself. Like he's thinking outside the box. And then I think that there's another line after he talks about when he wakes up and he comments on the poncho and he's like, you know, your wife knit? And he's like, no, crochets. So it's just a simple line of them starting to build their, you know, relationship.
And it's such a good way of illustrating the very self-absorbed character who doesn't know how to learn about anybody else's life. He's kind of trying now. And that's your first glimpse at him having a sort of a change of heart.
This is what we're talking about with like the Renaissance. Like this is the classic. I know it's not like considered one of those ones. It's not The Little Mermaid. It's not Hercules. It's not, you know, that's why we're talking about, because it's underrated, but it should be one of those ones. Like that's all you can say. You're just like, yeah, everything fits, everything, you know, their journey together. Like, you know, and the next part is where, you know, they go on their separate ways. They come back together. Like, it's just, there's nothing you can say, you know, it's beautiful.
So from this scene, we have a cut back to Yzma and Kronk. And when Yzma finds out Cusco is still alive through Kronk's, you know, mishappenings. And this is when we get the second appearance of the squirrel. And what does so well is Kronk, this is when we find out he's one with the animals. He's, you know, he's a scout and he's talking with the squirrel. Squeaker squeak, squeak squeaking, squeaker squeaks, squeaking. And Yzma's trying to get involved, but the squirrel doesn't like Yzma because she's already yelled at him once.
Yep.
And so then we get this whole sequence of Yzma trying to like eavesdrop, right? And then Kronk's like, yeah, can we just get some space? We need to have a little discussion. So Yzma's like, fine, he goes away. And then the squirrel is continuing to talk.
A little further.
Yeah, a little further. And then the squirrel finally tells him that he ran into a llama and he's had a bad day. Yzma's like freaking out, so she zooms back over to the squirrel, and then the squirrel's all like hesitant, and then Kronk's like, no. And he's like, well, where did he go? So that's how we get that scene. And it just builds Kronk's character more, because now, instead of Kronk being the right-hand man to Yzma, it's like Kronk is Yzma's guide. Yzma's relying on Kronk now, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a good dynamic shift where Kronk was just the servant to now being the one that's going to take her where she needs to go.
Exactly. It's such a cool shift in character. Exactly like you said. He was the kind of brainless lackey to Yzma, and now he's the one she's dependent on.
I feel like Kronk, everyone has great character growth in this movie. For the amount of time this movie runs, everything happens so fast, and it's not rushed at all.
Not at all.
Yeah, no, I agree that it's not rushed at all. At the same time, it does happen so quickly. Like, you see the quick moment of Kuzco and Pacha with the poncho. Boom. Character development for Pacha, character development for Kuzco. It happens at the exact same time. So, again, it's written well. And another part with this scene is Kronk talks to squirrels. What's going on? So, introducing that new skill of Kronk's gives his character it's a different part of his identity, which changes how you view him. Again, from what you said, he's no longer just Yzma's, servant. Now he has, got a side hobby. What's going on? You find out, I was a scout, whatever. And you're like, it's another moment where you're like, boom, character development. So that's, a key staple in this movie, where they have small moments that give you a lot of information. Surprisingly, when you're a kid, they make it in a way where you can follow it, and it's not too much.
And I think that goes into what I said earlier about how the dialogue was written, where they're repeating things a couple times. So like, you have time to catch up with what they're saying, because they're repeating certain points in the sentence. So they're repeating, the squirrel sequence. He's talking to the squirrel, but like, they're pausing for a sec to like give the jokes of like, he doesn't like Yzma because he's basically, Yzma's like Kuzco, or he had a bad thing with Kuzco. So everything is like catching us up all the time. And we're never like losing ourselves in how fast the movie's going.
Exactly. Yeah, that small amount of repetition just ingrains the story into your brain, whether you're a kid or whether you're an adult.
One of my favorite scenes in this movie is coming up right now, is when we have the crossroads of Yzma and Kronk and Pacha and Kuzco at a diner.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of the diner, when Kuzco and Pacha first get there, there's a sign out there that says no llamas. Because like, clearly llamas are the only animal that, all these peasants keep bringing in everywhere. And so we have the struggle of like, Kuzco's now a llama, so he can't go in there. So he dresses up. He puts on a little Pacha's poncho and lipstick and eyelashes.
They're on a date.
He's like, oh, yeah, they're on a date. And he's like, oh, trust me, they'll never notice it's me, kind of thing. So they're in there and they're talking. And then, the waitress comes up and asks them what they want. And then Kuzco, it's like his hands are llama hands. So it's like he's holding the menu. And then Pacha's like, oh, it's our honeymoon. And then he's like, congrats. The waitress like, congrats to the happy couple, kind of thing. And then Kuzco goes to the back because they get their food, and it's like this big old bug.
Yep.
And it's like a callback. It's like almost a callback to The Lion King, where they're eating grub.
I was thinking the exact same thing.
They pop open the thing, and Pacha's just drinking it with a straw. And Kuzco's all grossed out like Simba was. And so he goes to the back, and he's going to go ask the chef if there's anything he can adjust to the menu. And that's when we get Kronk and Yzma coming into the booth, and then Pacha's like overhearing their conversation because they're one booth apart from each other. And it's such a great scene of back and forth. It's like, oh my God, will they find out Kuzco's right here? And will Pacha give it away? And will Kronk, really, and Yzma like figure things out? She doesn't like anything on the menu. Yzma's like, what is everything swimming in gravy on this menu? Like, what is going on here? And then Pacha is coughing up on the other side because he finds out they're looking for Kuzco. And then he's like, oh, are you okay, man? He's like, do I know you? Wrestled you in high school. I think this is all, it's all like, we get more stuff about Kronk. It's like, what, do you wrestle too? And it's just another thing. It's like, no, I don't think you know me. And then so Pacha disappears because he pretends he's leaving, and he goes to get Kuzco in the back, and that's when Kronk goes to the kitchen because Yzma doesn't like anything on the menu. And then he goes in the kitchen, and he's like, "Hey man, what's your deal with making special orders?" And he's like, "That's it, Buster. I quit. You want a special order? You do it." And I love this scene because it's like Disney animation when they were at their peak for 2D, at the highest. He dumps whatever the pot of what he was making,
right into the suitcase,
right into the suitcase, and he flicks up all of the utensils he uses, packs them into the suitcase, and runs out. I feel like this movie, I was talking to Adria, it's like, this is peak 2D animation for Disney. Like, they're really showing off. So he's now in charge of the chef, which makes sense because he's a chef in real life. Like, he cooks food, so he should have no problem. And then the waitress comes up and she goes, "Ordering." And then she gives them, she's like, 3 pork combos, extra bacon on the side, 2 chili cheese samplers, a basket of liver and onion rings, a catch of the day, and a steak cut in the shape of a trout. And then she goes, "You got all that, honey?" So he goes, 3 workers wearing pants, plate of hot air, basket of grandma's breakfast, and change a bowl into a gill. Got it. I was like, I didn't, until I'm reading the lines, like when I was making notes for this, I had no idea what he said. But it's so funny because she asked for 3 pork combos. So he says 3 oinkers wearing pants. A plate of hot air. I assume that's bacon on the side, right?
Yes.
And then a basket of grandma's breakfast, which is liver and onion rings. I don't really understand the correlation, but it's funny.
So in diners, if I think they have a lingo, like maybe it's different for every diner, but like diners have quick lingo to pass to the kitchen to like convey their menu. So they like yell it across the room and then they repeat it back to say that they've understood. So I thought that was like such a good line because he pauses for a second and you think, oh no, he's not going to get this, and then he just rattles off this diner.
It's like
list.
He's done it before, right? It's like he was somewhere. It's like more mystery to Kronk's backstory. It's like he gives you all the dialogue. He's like, "Got it," and then he proceeds to just orders up, ordering, orders up. Come get your orders. Orders are ready to go, and then that's the tension grows even more because now Kronk's in the back making food, and Kuzco and Pacha are stuck in the closet and they don't know how to get out. And he's like, "You know what? I'm just going to go ask the chef myself." And he goes and he's like, they start rattling off what they want and with the potatoes and the side. And then Yzma comes in and they're doing this whole back and forth. They're doing the revolving door trick where it's like, oh my God, they're in the same space, but they don't see each other. And they both go back to the table and they're both looking at the menus and Kuzco puts his down and Yzma pulls hers up. And then they go back and forth and they're just, will they, won't they, tug of war if they're finally in the same place, and is Kuzco going to get caught, and is Yzma and Kronk going to win?
For me, that scene was definitely like a really big callback to old comedies.
Like the Three Stooges and
exactly,
stuff, right?
Like short skits to really highlight like tension and release to fulfill an action. And it's just like...
it's like an I Love Lucy skit.
Exactly. Where there's so much going on, everything's so busy, and it's just you just can't help but like laugh at it the whole time.
And this is when, Jesse, you were saying earlier, when they go their separate ways, they get into this argument and, Pacha doesn't want to deal with it. He's like, fine, you don't believe me, then I'm just going to leave you here and you can deal with it yourself. But then you get a sense of him like coming to terms with maybe he's just going to be a llama forever.
Right.
Again, I'm a broken record, but it's good writing because in the one moment before where you have the poncho scene, and you see a little character development, he still goes back to, I'm in my groove. I got this. I can handle it. I'm going to order, all the stuff that I want. I'm going to go through the revolving door, the up and down with the menus. Like that happens, because again, it's just good comedy. But it also happens because Kuzco is just confident in himself and he's doing stuff without thinking. So that is representative of, everybody's kind of self-improvement. It's not linear. It's not, he has the poncho moment and then from that moment on he's fixed. Number one, it's not a compelling story to tell. It's not interesting. And then number two, it's not realistic, which again makes it good writing because now he's having another moment with Pacha where he's saying, okay, you are a good friend. Fine. All right. Let's see. It's more developed and, it's half for entertainment purposes because again, if it was solved right when the first character development moment happened, there'd be nothing else to watch. But there's a bit of realism to it.
Because that's also, he's still Kuzco, but he's finally realizing, like, he can allow other people in. Like, Pacha's not. Peasants aren't bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Yeah. You're not gonna solve a main character's pretty much biggest character flaw with one act of kindness. He's still gonna have the 18 years that he's been alive worth of being spoiled and self-absorbed to overcome eventually. And it's gonna seep through in other aspects.
And from here, you're thinking like, okay, the movie has come to a point you're like, where do they go from here? Right? Because we're at the point where, okay, now they're going back to the palace. But where does that leave Yzma and Kronk? And it's like, are we in a lull? No, we're not. Because we cut right back to Yzma and Kronk having a camp out in the middle of the forest. And Yzma's in her tent, and Kronk is laying there, and he has this little like towel teepeed over his legs, like he's in his own little tent, and he's holding a stuffy. And he wakes up and has an epiphany, and he's like, the guy at the diner, he didn't pay his check. And then he falls back asleep, and he wakes up immediately, and he goes, it's the peasant I saw leaving with Kuzco. Yeah. And then he goes, he must have taken Kuzco with him to his village. So if we find him, we find Kuzco. And then he looks at the camera, and to this day, I still say this all the time. And he goes, it's all coming together. You know, he looks at the camera, and he's just like, oh yeah, it's all coming together.
Such a good line.
And then he runs into the Yzma's tent, and he's like, Yzma. And she's like, what? And she's all like, she's got the cucumbers and the mask on. And he's like, ugh. And he's like, and he tells her his plan. This line must have been, you probably still say this line as from time to time, you know, it's all coming together. Like
100%. It's also said sarcastically in my life, whilst also being said in a way where, you know, oh, got some good things going on. Or if everything's falling apart, just go, it's all coming together.
Yeah. And what I find is another great story moment is, you know, he's walking up the palace, and it's something about Pacha as, you know, he's a part of this village. He's a family man, he's a village man, and he sees these two guys, and they're like, oh, hey, Pacha, how's it going? And you would think something like this would slow down the movie, but it doesn't, because they tell him exactly what's happening. He's like, oh, you just missed, you know, your relatives. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, what do they look like? He's like, you know, this big guy, and then this old woman. And then the other guy's like, how would I describe her? And she's like, you know, scary beyond all reason. Oh, yeah, that's it. And then just that simple line of dialogue pushes the movie even further, because now there's more of a rush to get to Pacha's house, because Yzma and Kronk are already there.
Yep. Oh, yeah, there is absolutely no slowing down, but it's done in such a way that it's like, it feels natural. It feels right that we're not cutting out anything important to get to that next beat. Everything is paced so well in this movie.
When they get to the house, you know, Yzma's given his wife, Pacha's wife, the gears.
Yep.
But Pacha's wife is so, you know, she's been around the block. She's not
no BS.
There's no BS with her. And the kids are, you know, Kronk's skipping rope with the kids, and it's I love the scene. They're like, Yzma's trying to get Kronk's attention. She's skipping rope with him too. She's trying to come up with a plan, and he's like, oh, yeah, okay, but I still got 98 more monkeys to go, or something like that. 96 monkeys to go. And then they cut back to Yzma hopping back in to talk to Pacha's wife, and then it cuts back to Kronk, and then he's like, this is my interpretation of double dutch. Yeah. And he's like doing more stuff with the kids. And then Yzma goes back to talk to Kronk, and he's like, and switch. And so now she's jumping rope, and they're hopping. Oh. And again, it's just more comedy, but it's making the movie feel fast, right? Yeah. Everything is happening. And Pacha, right? And they're trying to alert Pacha's wife what's happening. And then she finally gets it. And then they lock him in a closet and take the knob. Yep. It really shows how well the family is together, right? The kids and the wife and Pacha, they're such a unit. And without even speaking, Pacha's wife can just turn it on.
They know the plan.
Right? And there's, they know the plan, and they have to go.
Yeah, no, the scene really, it's very enjoyable, because Kronk makes it enjoyable, but it's also pushing the tension forward as well, because of the skipping, because of the jumping back and forth, because of the communication through the window. Like, you're absorbing this as a kid, but you're also really enjoying it. And it's another part of the movie where you're looking at it and you're like, everything that they're doing is purposeful. The skip rope is Kronk's character. So they stay true to him through this whole time. So that's Kronk. So you're writing these individual stories and personalities with each other. The kids are silly, they're in their own world. Kronk is in no world because he's in his own. He's like, I'm talking to squirrels. I'm skipping. Oh, I'm a part of this family now. He's just like enjoying life. It is what it is. And Chicha is just like wife goals 100%. So it's all of these things all together. I love how it ends. I love how Kronk coming out, and you fall in love with Kronk even more throughout this scene. That's what happens.
And to go back to what you said about the skip rope, I feel like it's a metaphor for the movie. Like they started off with just a single jump, right? They were one person in there with just skipping rope. And then he says, now we're going to take it to double Dutch. And from this scene on, the movie picks up ×2. So I feel like it's also telling the audience, listen, we were moving at this pace and now we're going to be doubling up. And this next scene of them racing back to the palace, Adrian and you probably remember this, Jesse, but I think it's an amazing form of creativity when they did the map and they had the lines on the ground of them running back to palace, and they kept going back to the map and showing us where they were. And like when Kronk was going, and then there was a meta moment where he looks down and looks behind him and sees the trail he's leaving, and we can see their paths crossing, but it's just like another way for us to be like, okay, we're keeping track of where they're going, but it's a nice, clever way to get to where we need to go, because it took forever for them to get to the palace the first time. They never made it there. But now we're going to get there in 2 minutes, and we're going to see in a creative way. And then we get a great scene. It calls back to pull the lever, Kronk.
Yes.
From earlier when, before she does the I'll turn him into a flea scene. In her lair, she has this, bowl hanging out, and she pulls a lever, and it takes them on this like roller coaster. Put your hands in the air, Yzma. And then so Kuzco and Pacha are now in there, and they go to pull the lever, and then he pulls the wrong lever, and he has the crocodile on him. He smacks it away, and she's like, why does she even have that lever? Yeah. But it goes back to tying it in, because they're late to the game because of that lever. Because when they get in there, Yzma and Kronk have already made it, and then they pull a joke. It's like, how did you even get here? That doesn't even make any sense. And they cut back to like the map, and Kronk's like, yeah, it really doesn't make sense of how we ended up here first.
By all accounts, it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. And then it's just, it's a playground, right? Because they have all these different vials in Pacha's poncho.
Yep.
And he just starts feeding them to Kuzco to try to get him back to a human. And it's so enjoyable because, like, okay, what else? What other stuff are we going to see, right? We saw him as a llama. Now he's a whale.
And a bird.
Now he's a turtle. And now he's a bird. But the bird thing was hilarious.
Yeah.
Jesse, I don't know if you remember when he gets, oh yeah, I'm flying. And then he's just a little bird, and he's like, oh, never mind.
Yeah, no. There's a couple of great Easter eggs in this movie and good fan theories related to the animals and how the humans and how they get turned into animals. In the early parts of the movie, when they're talking about Kuzco's childhood and they're telling the story, they show him as a baby playing with some stuffed animals. The 3 stuffed animals are a llama, a whale, and a bird.
No.
So that's number 1.
Wow. I didn't put
number
that together.
2, if you're looking at, like, because it even happens with the guards that get turned into animals, they start talking because you said, oh, I'm a cow. Can I go home? Like, I'm useless. What am I going to do here? But think about the squirrel who doesn't talk. And if you remember the spider, when Kuzco first gets into the forest and stumbles upon the squirrel and the jaguars, the spider kills a fly, and the fly talks because the fly says,
yes, that's right.
Help me. And the spider just eats them. So the spider doesn't talk, the squirrel doesn't talk, but all of the humans that get turned into animals talk. So you look at the fly and you're like, maybe that was a human. Like there's cool little, undertones that you pay attention to, and you're like, this is like, it's just like, I'm saying it over and over again. It's a well-written movie.
I didn't even realize that.
Me neither.
Oh man, good catch.
To follow up the scene where Yzma is now a cat, and when she transforms, they have like this, almost like the genie vibes from Aladdin, right? She's clouded in smoke, and they think it's like Jafar.
Yep. and it zooms out, and then she's just a tiny little cat, and she's like, "Is this my voice?" You know, and she's just, "Is that my voice?" And she's like, "Anyway, I'll kill you." And she does all this other stuff, and like they're chasing the vial, but then Yzma falls, but no one's gonna die in this movie. So what do? They put in an amazing joke with the guard at the front of the palace, and he says, and this guy with a big trampoline, he's like, "I told you last time we did not order a giant trampoline." And then the guy goes, "Well, you could have told me that before I set it up." And then Yzma comes down, hits the trampoline. They hold the frame for like 4 frames. She hits there and then berserks right back up. And it's just like, you didn't need to put that in there, but you know, no one's going to die in this movie.
Exactly. Yeah, because you could have, realistically, she could have just like splatted on the ground and been okay.
Yeah.
You know, like, and then she'd get up and go, but no, trampoline's way funnier.
And then we get the callback to them walking up the mountain together, right? The palace is shaped exactly like the mountain for the nose, and they, you know, back to back walk up to try to get the vial. Yzma snatches it, but eventually they end up getting it. Kuzco turns back into a human. You know, Pacha, they're back at the palace. Kuzco goes to Pacha and says, "You know, you lied to me." And Pacha's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "You know, you told me when I get to the side of the mountain and at a certain time on the right, the hills sing. I didn't hear any singing on these hills," because we finally get the full, you know, transformation of Kuzco coming around, realizing there's more to life than just himself. Kuzco's now part of the village, and he jumps out and he does the thing in the beginning, boom, baby, and then Pacha's doing it, boom, baby, and then all the kids are there, and they have this whole, you know, palace on the hill that's not going to bother anybody, and they have the water slide and this whole Kuzco-topia. You know, they have this whole thing where the kids can go, and they end on such like everybody's a family now, and like he's not all about himself, and there's more to life than just being an emperor. And it cuts to, you know, an end credit scene, if you will, of Kronk. He's now a scout leader, which will tie into Kronk's new groove. And the kids, Pacha's kids are there, and they're all learning to speak squirrel. And it cuts into Yzma, and she's a cat, and she's in her little outfit, and she goes squeaking, and it zooms in on her, and that's how the movie ends.
So good. But we can't forget Kuzco's super cool crocheted poncho.
Oh yeah, he gets the
with
poncho
the llama on it. Oh,
with the llama on it. Yeah, and she hugs Pacha's wife, and it's just a nice moment. You know, he's getting a gift, and he is appreciative.
Exactly.
I mean, again, let's just start at Chicha. You know, it's a 10 out of 10. No, it's absolutely like it was always, you know, a great movie. I mean, the lines that we quoted growing up, those coming back to me, those are like, it's pure nostalgia. So my ranking has got to be, it's biased for sure, but it is what it is. Like this is not less than a 9 out of 10, you know. I don't know if you're going to do 9.5, 9.8, or 10 out of 10. I don't know what a 10 out of 10 would even be in terms of a Disney movie, of what you might rank something. But this isn't less than 9 because it's circular, you know, comes together from the beginning. Themes, you see them at the end, you know, jokes in between that also repeat. Great storytelling for kids, great entertainment for adults. The animation, like, it's always been one of my favorite movies.
I would agree. I wouldn't put it lower than a 9 out of 10 either.
Me too.
And like you said, like nostalgia aside, like me and Nick just rewatched it this week, and it's still as good.
Oh yeah.
Only it's not because we remember it, so that's why we think it's as good. But we pick up more as adults because we're like, oh my god, that's genius! Like for one of Disney's first full comedy movies, they crushed it.
Yep, that was a nearly perfect movie for me. It was so enjoyable, and it's short enough to digest that you're just like, wow, that was a nice way to end the night for me.
And I think that pays into why Jesse and I watched it on loop, right? Jesse probably watched it back to back 1 or 2, 3 times because you can watch it 3 times and only like 4 hours have gone by on a Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
which, you know, it's a lot of time now, but as a child with no responsibilities and no schedule, you know, you're Kronk essentially, and you're in your own world. Like,
yeah,
it's just great. That's why, you know, that's why they made a Kronk's New Groove, because like, it's just Kronk drives that movie. You fall in love with him. Kuzco is there and he's relatable. I mean, Kronk's my favorite to me, you know. Kronk's New Groove hits probably just as hard.
It's been a minute since I've seen that.
Me too. Yeah.
They made something that worked and that stuck. And even today, that's why all the 90s and early 2000 Disney films hit so hard, right? The problem with today, it's like that's a whole nother topic we can talk about. Where Disney movies today, it's not because they're nostalgic. They were just so much, the production and the creation of the movies back then were so much better made quality-wise. Whereas now they're just trying to rush things to make content.
It felt like there were stakes when making those movies. Like they actually had to really put their heart and soul into all aspects of it, or else they would go under or something. Yeah. And now it feels like that's not the case. Yes, obviously the animation of the new movies is like spectacular, and there's always really good redeeming parts to the new movies, but the wholeness of those movies back then, it like the new stuff can't hold up to it.
I was just gonna say the new stuff definitely can't hold up to the old classic movies. It goes to what you said, Nick. Like, a lot of those movies, they didn't know if they would even get made. They didn't even know if they had the budget to get made. They were rushing to make them. Like so many of the ones that are amazing now, like Hercules and just Pocahontas and Tarzan, the cloud, like you're making the music, you're making the everything for it, and don't even know if it's going to be made. Like there's a ton of documentaries about it. There's so many behind the scenes stuff about it. And you're just like, wow, you just got to appreciate the vision of these people. You got to appreciate the content that they eventually put out. And there's no way that you can mention classic Disney without appreciating Phil Collins and how hard he went for us. And that's why new Disney, touch it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think that also is the cap to the Disney Renaissance, as they would say. And I think this movie really pays tribute to why we love Disney so much growing up. And each individual film had its own reasons for why it was our favorite or in our top 5. We were watching it all the time, And I think this movie is a testament to how well, again, they were made and how much love and care went into them. And the overall feel of them going into a movie being like, they probably do this today, but I feel like they went into it with more heart and soul, and like, could be their last film, right? Whereas now they're just $1 billion franchise with endless amounts of money.
Yeah, there were stakes.
That just puts out stuff, you know? So I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank Jesse for hopping on with us today to talk about The Emperor's New Groove.
Yeah. No, it's a pleasure, boys. This is going to be such a good treat. I'm glad that there's so many good episodes to look forward to. So stay tuned, guys.
So thank you all for listening. I'm Brian.
And I'm Nick. And this is 2 Hours on a Sunday.
Talk to you guys later.